Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
She said that.
Rise to the pledge of allegiance. With a short, can you guys hear me? Do I need this? We have a short agenda, typical for November. The presentation will be on the American Rescue Plan. If you have filled out a question, you can present that, and we'll address that at the end. And Roman numeral 4, any questions on the agenda, we'll address that. Please keep your questions to the board. Please be civil with regard to your questions. Any outbursts or loud comments, we will complete our business and proceed to bring the meeting to an end. First thing we will do is the superintendent's report, leading into Dr. Williams' presentation on the rescue plan and our application for the grant.
Thank you, Bob. A little bit, we want to inform the community about the American Rescue Plan. This pandemic has taken an extraordinary toll on students, parents, educators, and schools. We know our students return to full in-person learning with much needs. We saw loss of learning. We saw students needing mental and emotional support. Dr. Timo will give a brief presentation about the revisions of the American Rescue Plan grant. We're focusing and dedicating 100% of that allocation for our students in addressing the loss of learning and students' academic and social emotional needs. Would the board join me below, please?
Can everybody hear me? Hopefully. Okay, tonight I'm just going to do probably about a 5-minute presentation on the American Rescue Plan and the elementary and secondary schools emergency relief fund. We were given these funds, a little bit of the background is that, Mark, okay, the background to the ARP ESSER funds is this was signed into law on March 11th, 2021. And ARP, as we refer to it, makes available nationally $122.8 billion. New York State was allocated $9 billion for the ARP ESSER grant. And allocations to each district within the state were calculated using the same type of calculation they use for our Title I Part A grant, which is, we've been getting that for probably about 40 years. Mount Sinai's ARP ESSER allocation is $1,481,557. 20% of that funding, or at least 20%, must be used to address the learning loss due to the pandemic, and it must also address the academic, social, emotional needs, and the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 for certain subgroups and populations. It is a multiple-year grant. We are allowed to use the funding through the grant for anything from March 13th of 2020 through September 30th of 2024. So in looking at this grant, we can open it up, we can revise it, and we decided that we would review it about every 6 months. The budget narrative, once the grant is completed, will be on the district's website. I'll probably post the first narrative that is not approved yet, and then once it's approved, we will be posting the approved portion. Okay, when you look at the funding in the grant program, according to the ARP applications, there are about 20 very specific categories that you can use. But those 20 categories really fall into 3 general uses. One is for safe operation of in-person learning. And what does that mean? Because that sounds like a strange term. That just means if we're returning students to school, which we did last year, you can use those funds for any kind of prevention or mitigation strategies to ensure that the students are safe in school. Educational technology, that was placed in there in several places because we can use the funding to purchase either Wi-Fi or devices to ensure that students would be able to engage in remote instruction should we have to go remote due to the pandemic. The third broad category is to address the academic impact of the whole child and those disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, either due to being on remote instruction for a year or more, losing instructional time, social emotional health among subgroups of students. We know that many of our students have had a lot of struggles along the way, both academically and social emotionally. Mount Sinai's proposed use of funds, we're proposing to use not 20% for student, but 100% for student academic achievement and performance. We're adding additional AIS services so that there are ELA reading teachers for a two-year period, for this year and for the following year. 2 AIS math teachers, again for 2 years, 2 special education teachers, 2 elementary teachers, and the elementary teachers were really to reduce class size so that with the younger populations, we can really keep a close eye and constant assessment on how they're doing with academics. New York State came out with a memo in June of this past year regarding special education services to students with disabilities, and we need to address special education recovery services for this next year for particular students who were either unable to graduate because they were on remote instruction or lost instruction, or those who did not receive a commencement credential. We're also going to be looking probably toward the spring of this year, February, March, at the need for any kind of summer academic intervention services for math and for literacy, reading in particular, like a reading recovery program or a math enrichment program, which might be needed to catch certain students up. But we have to take a look at how our students are doing this year. If anyone has any questions or comments regarding the proposed plan, you can send it to artfunding@mountsinai.k12.ny.us, and those questions or comments will come to me and some other people who can then answer them. So if you have any comments, that we would invite you to place them in. Next slide.
Thank you, Dee. Not in the grant is more social, emotional, mental health. The district hired one additional school psychologist who will be working in all 3 buildings. His duties have already been arranged. He is starting shortly. This is much like what we did 4 years ago when we added a new social worker to work in all 3 buildings as well. So now this is more support for our kids coming off of remote and being affected by the pandemic. So we're doing our best to support our kids academically, socially, emotionally. And again, please remember that address that Dee had posted. Any comments, questions on the American Rescue Plan, please send them in to us. Thank you. Board, would you like to return, please?
questions on the agenda?
With regard to the grant,
Yes.
will there be further delineation of how each school is impacted? Like how much of those services are available to elementary versus middle versus high school?
Did you hear the question?
The question is,
I-
will there be a delineation of the funds between the three schools?
Yes. Much like with the Title I funding, I get, with Title I, it's a little different. You get a grouping you have to spend for each school. This grant did not do that. They give us our Title I type of calculation. We can spend it how we like. Those teachers, with the placement, the general ed teachers are in the elementary school. Special ed teachers are split, one elementary, one middle school. Trying to think what else is in there. The 3 AIS teachers are split also, elementary, middle. The high school will have the special ed recovery services. And we're looking at, the high school AIS is a little different. It's already built into the schedule. So it's not something additional that we'll be providing, but students receive that already scheduled into their schedule through labs. So there are math labs, science labs, things like that.
Right, I understand that, but the pandemic hit the high school kids at a time when some of the courses were getting much more difficult. And I know from friends and from my own that, can you hear me? That there was some learning loss and there was some need for recovery and might be short term. So will any of those funds be applied to that?
It impacts the entire district. Some of, specifically a dollar amount, I can't tell you the dollar amount that will go to the high school, but it's for learning loss across the district.
So there will be services there as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's not all the services that we're providing. That's all the services that are coming out of the grant.
Right.
But we continue to supply all kinds of services for the students, as well as increased social emotional learning and social emotional support.
Please.
Good evening, everybody. So I have a question. In the presentation, what's meant by disproportionate?
What the terminology in the grant says, that those students who are disproportionately affected are those who are low income, students of color, homeless, foster students. If we have any migrant students, which we don't, those students would be increasingly impacted. But similarly, the Title I grant says the same thing. And that's what our funding is based on, our free and reduced lunch count, our low-income students, economically disadvantaged. But we can use it across the board for all students.
Now, let me ask you a question. Does that also apply to kids with special needs? Because 2 of my 3 children
Yes,
have special
absolutely.
needs, and it took quite a while to get my youngest son any services because of lack of money or staffing or whatever. So I'm just questioning, when you say disproportionate, then you give those explanations, like why special education and other kids who are requiring like building level services, I think why that's not part of that description of
ELLs and students with
disproportionate.
disabilities are covered under that as well. And if you notice, we had a couple of special education students that we increased services with students. And we also have the memo that came out that we're using for the special education recovery services for the older students. Those are the high school age
Okay,
students.
so then subgroups, what do you mean by subgroups? Is it the same thing, the same classification?
The subgroups can include ELL, students with disabilities. It can include economically disadvantaged, low-income students, students of color.
What are the
homeless
percentages
and-
of those
homeless and
classifications
foster
in this district?
Excuse me? I can't-
What's the percentage of those subgroups in this district? I'm just saying you're getting a certain amount of money for those things, so what is the percentage
No.
compared to
I think
the
you're
other
misunderstanding.
main
We
groups?
don't get the money for just to target those specific groups. We get an amount of money that we can use for all students in the district.
So
It
what
is-
percentage is being used towards this? And what is the percentage of students that fall into each category? That's something I think a lot of people would want to know, just so that we understand how the money's
Students
being
with
applied.
disabilities, and you know, do I have the exact percentages in front of me? I don't. For students with disabilities, it's probably about 11% of our population.
Mhm.
Economically disadvantaged disadvantaged, I think we're up to about 14%.
Okay,
ELL, less than 1%.
okay.
Right now, I think today we have 17 ELL students.
And then you also said students of color, because apparently that qualifies for additional money.
Yes.
Okay, and what's the percentage on that?
1% African American population, 12.2% Hispanic. I'm trying to think, Asian population is at about 6.2%.
Okay,
In
So-
the application grant, as I understood it, we submitted our entire population.
right.
Right.
And then they decide based on what you submit.
This is what we have for our district.
Okay,
If you notice, I was a little surprised. 1.4 million, to me, is a lot of money, but overall in the district, it's not a lot. We didn't get a large sum of money, and it's not all at once, but it's for the plan that we put together. In that plan, there is the discussion of AIS, special ed. We had already done some things. The psychologist is not part of the grant. The
Okay.
technology, we didn't use any of the money for technology. We had already budgeted for that.
okay,
So based on what we were applying for, that's what we got.
Okay.
Other districts may apply for different money,
right.
but that's what we're entitled to.
Okay. So I guess my last, in closing, I guess part of my concern is, I feel like, and again, I'm saying this with the children who are receiving special education services, and I think everyone, you know, many people would agree, and we all want a lot of kids fell behind. So obviously, we all have the same goal to get everyone back on track, right? And to get caught up and to be doing the best they can where they should be for their grade level and excelling beyond that point, truthfully. My concern is that, you know, we got CARES Act money, correct? Last year, the year before, whatever it was, that part of that money was not just for COVID funding and education, it was also for, it also had strings attached to it, which were part of DEI and other things that were being implemented by the state. And then here we are now getting this American Rescue Plan, and instead of using words like the, you know, acronyms like DEI, it's SEL, which we all know goes hand in hand, and we're subcategorizing all these different things. And I guess, I just feel like the state and the government keep dangling this carrot, like, hey, we're gonna give you money for this, and everybody wants free money, right? But at what cost? Because there's other things attached, clearly. And I guess with everything going on, it's a concern because, you know, and we're gonna get to that, I'm sure, but even with things with the vaccines and stuff, like some of the money you guys have accepted, there were strings attached regarding vaccination sites and vaccination mandates and other things, to my knowledge. So what happens if we don't comply and then they want the money back? Where does that leave the
Can I just
district?
speak to the grant? None of that is in the.
No, I'm just saying, so even with
Yeah,
this,
none
because
of
it does
that's been
pertain,
in
so
any
even with
grant.
this, if things change, like what else is in the fine print? And if things change and the school district decides as a whole not to do other things that may be asked of us as this whole bait and switch thing continues to go on, are we gonna give the money back or how, like, what's gonna
I
happen?
think what's important is what we applied for is related to the educational plan that we've seen. Now, other school districts applied differently. They may have applied for reimbursement money, they may have applied for technology money. We didn't. I think the use of the AIS teachers, the use of additional teachers as our population needs it, and our population is our kids.
Right.
That's what we planned, and that's what we're applying for.
So,
If there's other grants,
right,
we
but
may
now
not
what
qualify.
happens, like, I know with the CARES Act money, when I spoke with Mr. Brazil, it was like, you know, when we went over that months ago, it was like, okay, some of it we got, some of it we were promised, we weren't received yet, right, correct? Okay, so how does that work with this? If, and we also the letter, we appreciate the letter, so that you guys sent to the governor and the state and everything. But if things are to go south and there are certain mandates put in place, and a good percentage of us pull our kids from the district, then you guys are going to be repaying that money? I'm just asking, because our taxes do pay the school district, so even if my kids aren't enrolled, I'd like to know.
I don't see any tie in the than flying and that money. That money is not connected to that at all.
Okay.
Now, if we turn around, the way I look at it, if we turn around and we use it to what I'll call a non-recovery plan, such as we're not using it for educational purposes. We're using it to,
On the air conditioners.
do the parking lot or
Right.
something like that. That's not what the grant says you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And it's temporary. You only get it for 2 years. But this is not meant to be the be-all and end-all fund. It's meant to supplement, and it should be used to supplement what we're already doing and add it. I can't speak to other districts where they may not, what they're choosing to do with different funds. We didn't apply it towards technology. We already had that coming in and in place. We didn't apply it towards other things. We applied it towards classroom, basically. And that's what I think is the most important, the classroom and the classroom interaction. We already had in place coming in the psychologist.
Right.
Those are important. I don't think there's any language in this grant that has any ties to any other requirements other than we have to demonstrate that we're using it for these purposes. And the language that we presented is we're using it for our students, for their academic betterment and recovery from the past 13 or 18 months.
Okay. So it's dependent though on the enrollment numbers, correct? Does it continue? Like I'm saying, if in January, if the vaccine's mandated and 300 of us pull our kids, do you guys have to submit numbers for the next year to get the next year's money, or do you have to repay them if the numbers of enrollment drop? Like, how does that work?
I don't know why you keep saying payback.
No, once the grant is
It's done.
approved.
It's just based on the
Correct.
numbers today.
Once
That's
the
what I'm
grant
answering.
is
That's all I wanted to know.
It's
Okay.
approved.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions on the agenda? All right. Approval of the minutes, number 3. Ed?
Approval of minutes. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education hereby accepts the minutes of the October 19th, 2021 regular meeting as submitted.
May I have a second? Second. Thank you. Any comments? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And 5, personnel A appointments. Anne Marie?
Appointments, instructional, school psychologist. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education hereby approves the following appointment of Donald Magnuson, start date November 18th, 2021, expiration date November 17th, 2025, in the tenure area of school psychologist, compensation step 1 teacher's contract, and certification is permanent.
May I have a second?
I'll second that.
Wait. Any comments? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Lisa, number 2, substitute teachers.
Number 2, substitute teacher. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education hereby approves following substitute teacher appointments. Molly Devine, start date November 5th, 2021. Substitute teacher, compensation $150. Emily Godin, November 12th, 2021. Substitute teacher, compensation $150.
Second that?
Thank you, Pete. Any comments? All in favor, indicate aye.
Aye.
Appointments, non-instructional. Paul?
Appointment non-instructional office assistant. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education hereby approves the following part-time appointment. The employee is Michelle Carrion, start date of October 28, 2021, area office assistant, compensation step 1.5%.
May I have a second, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Ed. Any comments? All in favor, indicate aye.
Aye.
Number 2, Karen, school district A.
Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education hereby approves the following appointments. The only employee of the Spindle, start date November 8th, 2021, school district compensation step 1.
May I have a second?
Second.
Paul? Any comments? Madam Clerk, please note my abstention. All those in favor?
Aye.
Number 3, substitute custodian. Pete?
Number 3, substitute custodian. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education hereby approves the following appointment. Victor Roman, start date November 17, 2021, area substitute custodian, compensation $15.50 an hour.
Thank you, Pete. May I have a second,
I'll
please?
second that.
Any comments? All in favor, indicate aye.
Aye.
C, other appointments, coaches. Lisa?
The other appointment coaches, resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent, Board of Education hereby approves the following coaching appointments. At varsity wrestling, Matt Armstrong, and Ralph Menachino. Step 19, split stipend and then 10/19/21 appointment. Assistant varsity wrestling, Ralph Menachino, Matt Armstrong. Step 7, split stipend and then 10/19/21 appointment. Boys basketball, Harrison Block, volunteer. And girls basketball, Christina Gully, and that's 7.
May I have a second, please?
Second.
Paul, any comments? All in favor, indicate aye. Aye. Ed, educational items?
Action items, Educational Committee on Special Education. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education has no objections to the following special education recommendations and approves the authorizations for the funds to implement the special education programs and services consistent with such as listed.
Thank you, Ed. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Paul, any comments? All in favor, indicate aye.
Aye.
Action items, 1, memorandum of agreement. Paul?
Business memorandum of agreement, Teachers Association. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education hereby approves the memorandum of agreement with the Teachers Association dated November 5, 2021.
Second that?
Thank you, Pete. Any comments? All in favor, indicate aye.
Aye.
Anne Marie, bid, district-wide HVAC repairs.
Bid district-wide HVAC repairs. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education hereby rejects all bids received on or before October 28, 2021 for district-wide HVAC.
May I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Any comments? All in favor, indicate aye.
Aye.
3, Karen, obsolete equipment.
Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education hereby declares the following items obsolete and further authorizes sale as listed. Bookshelves, physical items.
Second that?
And on the back, the AC unit as listed. Thank you, Pete. Any comments? All in favor? Aye. It's a short agenda. Any other questions? Mr. Johnson, you had a question? Comments about diversity in the school?
Yes, I just wanted to speak briefly, and I'll make it possible here. But so, hi again, my name is Skylar Johnson. I spoke at a meeting last month, but I do feel it's important to come back to speak again because this is an ongoing issue. My family's been in this town for a very long time. My mother attended the school before this building existed. My ancestors, my grandmother worked in this district for 30 years. So this community means a lot to me. It's a place that I'm looking to relate back to. Unfortunately, across the nation, we've seen in misguided attack on principles of diversity within our schools. So it's really, really disappointing to watch. So I just wanted to talk to the board about it as quickly as I could. So first of all, there's a lot of terms and acronyms that are thrown around. We hear SEL, DEI, CRT. SEL is just a program for social awareness. It's been shown to decrease bullying and physical aggression in schools by about 11%. It's extremely critical to our schools. It's been in operation in some form since I was going here. DEI refers to diversity and inclusion in schools. It's extremely important. I'll address walking in a minute. And critical race theory is something that cannot be taught in our schools. It is not being taught in schools, but it is practically impossible to be taught in schools. I am currently a college senior. I'm taking a class literally titled Philosophy of Race. And one of the first days, the professor went, oh yeah, I'm not qualified to teach critical race theory. It is a legal principle. It cannot be taught within our school district. There is no one here that is qualified to even begin the discussion. You need an extremely nuanced understanding of both race and law and the legal structure of how they intersect. And unless there's an extremely overqualified teacher here, I highly doubt that anyone here has a direct qualification. And that's not an attack on the teachers. If they're that qualified, I hope that they'll go and teach at a college level, because it gives you more professors at that level.
Keep in mind, Mr. Johnson, much of this you discussed at the last meeting, and you're running into about 3 minutes, so if you could wrap up.
Yeah, of course. But I just want to say, as someone who went to school here, it's extremely important that it is extremely important that we keep diversity in our schools. Because I'm a student who that directly affected. I saw the effects of a lack of diversity. I saw the effects of a lack of students and teachers who affect me, as well as a lack of curriculum that represents me as an individual. And that is something that we need to change. And I know that there's going to be continued attacks on that. I know that there's going to be continued discussions from people who I know they're looking out for the best for their children, but unfortunately this isn't the way to do it. So I hope that as these attacks go forward over the coming months, over the coming years, I hope that the school board recognizes the importance of the diversity of schools and continues to institute guiding principles along those lines. Thank you very much for your time.
I'll just add that based on our community involvement in our committee, frankly, I don't necessarily, I can't speak to other places. I don't see attacks. I don't see that type of conduct. There is exchange, there's people speaking with each other, and that's the reason why you have community involved in the committee discussing that topic. So I at least as we've experienced here, we've not had that, and we always want to have a positive exchange, and I think we have. We will continue to do that for all of our students and recognize all of these issues about belonging and making sure that people feel good. We have one other question. Ms. Barrera, was vaccination compliance or vaccination site part of the COVID CARES Act? It was not for us.
We actually kind of discussed that before, so
Okay.
if I could just quickly, another parent who's supposed to be able to come, who couldn't come, has a brief question.
Okay.
Do you mind?
No.
So I know that the board addressed the governor, like I said before. The question is basically, should the governor not respond, or have you received a response at this point? Okay.
Yes.
So if there's no response within a certain time frame, the 27th of November, I believe, is when the mandate ends, correct? And nobody wants to see anybody wasting energy and time on a plan, should there be more directive, but we should also be proactive. So is there a contingency plan or some type of a plan that's been in the works or possibly put aside for if there's no response by then, or like what are we planning to do if we have some type of an idea?
Is there a plan of vaccine?
No, as far as masking. Because the 27th of November is when the masking mandate
We
ends.
don't hear anything, it's still a mandate.
Right, but it's over on the 27th. That's why we're
It's
asking.
still a mandate. I'm hoping we hear something by the 27th, so are the other districts.
But if we
I
don't,
don't
then what?
understand the crickets on this, but we can't take it upon ourselves not to follow. I would think it has to be seen as a mandate still in place.
Our big issue is every time we've had something with regards to COVID from the state, we either get it Friday at 5 o'clock and have to scramble. The purpose of our letter was, as a
Right.
district, if you're leaving it out there, what is it we're supposed to do? We can't just turn on a dime. We're a small district. Bigger districts require even more time. So to answer your question, that's the purpose of the inquiry as to what is it you are intending to do. I listened to the governor this morning. It sounds like there are more mandates coming,
Yeah.
but we're at a point where we want to keep kids in person in school. Whatever tools we have to use to do that, that's what we're going to do.
Okay.
We didn't volunteer to be a facility. We're not tied to anything like that.
Right.
Our job is to make sure our kids, and I think we're doing even with some increases, we're doing a pretty good job.
I agree. I don't think anybody really has any complaints as far as the mitigation that's been going
No,
on.
and let's hope
So,
we can make it in that direction. Let's hope people are smart in terms of how they're doing things, because it does affect the kids coming then into school with the holidays and all that sort of stuff. But I think everyone's being pretty smart about what we're doing.
okay, so,
I don't know, and I don't pretend to know what
right.
is going to be.
So my question is a legal question. The mandate for the state for all school districts is done. It was 90 days, November 27th of
I don't
2021.
think she said done, I think she said revision.
It's 90 days, you can Google it. It's there. It's 90 days from the governor's website. 90 days, the 27th of this month. The 28th, whatever day that is, my children will be coming to school with no masks. What is the school's plan? Because if there is no legal mandate, every kid's coming to school with no plan, no mask. So I'm asking, I think there should be some type of a contingency plan or what the school is going to do should the governor not respond, or probably will come down with stricter mandates and other things, I guarantee. But I'm just saying, on that date, legally, there is no mask law for anybody, if you want to call it that. So are you guys all on the same page, that on the 28th, you're going to have probably 90% of the population coming in with no mask? And you cannot legally enforce it.
No, that's something we'll.
I'm asking, so can you please look into that and post something on the website as to what you're planning to do in the event you don't hear from the governor's office or the Department of Health? That's all. That's all I'm asking.
We will and are doing that, and will continue to do that as to all of the contingencies that we have to do.
Okay.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I just have one question about
And
the
a
air
second.
conditioning.
All in favor,
Wait,
aye?
this is about, sorry. I'll ask later, it's fine. It was about the air conditioning.
The
air conditioning.
I saw that it was denied to fix the air conditioning unit. I was just curious about that, because I know in the middle school last year.
It's a great question. When you bid, they bid out, and the bid was wickedly expensive for work that our staff and our engineer can do. So why pay them? We will have to buy a few extra tools, if you will,
Right.
but we'll do it ourselves.
But we have a plan to try to fix that problem, because that was an issue with the mass and
Yes.
heat.
There's two things going on. One is replacement. This is not replacement. This is significant repair, swapping out parts. But that is just, we're rejecting the bid because of the expense, but we're still doing it, but we're going to do it in-house. Thank you. All in favor of our adjournment to executive session for contractual matter? Aye. Everyone, please have a wonderful and safe Thanksgiving.